There seems to be a lot of confusion about what modes are, and today we're going to clear that up, but also there's a lot of contention about what the best approach is to learning about modes. And there's two schools of thought on this: relative modes and parallel modes. And let's take a second to look at the differences. When you learn relative modes, you learn about the 7 diatonic modes in a single key center. As you can see, all of these scales have the same 7 notes. They're just starting and ending in a different place. When you do this, you learn the finger patterns for each of these in different places going up and down the fretboard. As you can see here, there are 5 finger patterns, each in a different position on the fretboard. If you learn parallel modes, you take the same 5 finger patterns, but learn them all in the same position on the neck. In other words, all starting on the same root. The best way to first learn about modes is to learn relative. You map out the key over the entire fretboard and learn all 5 fretboard finger patterns at the same time. Not only are you killing 2 birds with 1 stone, but more importantly, you're setting yourself up to see how things work in a more functional context and to understand how the different modes relate to each other and to the key center. And by the way, I just want to mention my Patreon, where you can find PDFs for each position with some extra details about each mode's distinguishing characteristics, as well as a color-coded scale diagram highlighting these important notes in each scale. You can find a link in the description and help support the channel. So I teach the relative modes in the key of G, starting with G Ionian. And the reason I do this is because G is a simple key center that allows you to start down low on the neck with the first finger pattern and go up through the positions until you finish with the last one, without having to backtrack or cycle back around to the lower portion of the neck. So you saw there, I played the Ionian, I played the Dorian, I played the Phrygian Lydian, I played the Mixolydian, and I played the Aeolian. The Locrian is actually another shared position, just like the Phrygian and Lydian share a position. And so that's actually played in the same place as the Ionian scale. You may have noticed there are 5 positions, or 5 finger patterns, for the 7 modes, and that's the reason why. 2 of the positions are shared. So this is the best way to first learn your modes. Now, that said, there is a value to looking at parallel modes. When you do this, you compare different modes starting on the same root, and you get a better sense of what notes change between 2 modes and what the sonic characteristics are of each one. But that should come after the first step of learning relative diatonic modes in a single key. So the next question people ask is, if we're learning relative modes, which means they share the same notes, then how are they different? And the answer is tricky, because they are and they aren't. Some people will explain this as the same notes with a different starting and ending. So A to A is Dorian, B to B is Phrygian, etc. And that makes sense. But when we talk about the modes as scale shapes on the fretboard, that's where the confusion starts. Because we call this position Ionian, we call this Dorian, we call this Aeolian, and they're all different finger patterns, but if you think about it, I can play A to A in any of these positions. I can play it here in the Ionian, I can play it here in the Phrygian, or here in the Aeolian. So what we're actually doing is we just are naming these finger patterns after the mode that starts with the first or second finger on the E string. It's just a naming convention. So when we talk about modes as relating to these finger patterns, we're just labeling the finger patterns with the names of these modes based on where the first or second note of the scale pattern starts. The reality is that you can use any of these positions to play any mode, and that's actually the ultimate goal. It's to know the position so well that you can evoke the sound of any mode you want and do that across the entire fingerboard. So let me show you the most essential reason why I teach relative modes, and we'll use the first 2 patterns, the Ionian and the Dorian, to illustrate this. Most teachers will give you these 2 diagrams and tell you to play through them until you have them internalized in your muscle memory. But what most teachers won't tell you is to pay close attention to where the scales overlap. And this is the key, the most important reason I think you should learn relative modes first. If you take the parallel mode approach and learn all of the modes starting on the same root, you don't have any way to see these overlap areas. If you learn parallel modes, you only know the 5 positions as isolated finger patterns, and you're missing these connections that will eventually allow you to play freely across the entire fretboard. And before we wrap up, I want to show you one more thing that you can do once you learn your relative modes that you would never be able to do if you learned parallel modes instead. So remember when we talked about the fact that relative modes are all contained in the same key center? Well, it turns out we can use those finger patterns to identify and play the basic triad shapes that exist in that key. And that's the first thing I have students do, is go through root position triads because they're easy to see within these 5 finger patterns that we've been talking about. If we isolate the DGB string set, we have easily visible our G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and G major triads. If that seems tricky to you, take a look at your bar chord shapes in each position, and you'll notice we're just taking the 3 strings out of the bar chord. So what we're doing here is we're connecting these smaller chord shapes to the larger scale patterns that we're learning as we go up the neck. Are you starting to see why relative modes are much more helpful to getting a fundamental understanding of the fretboard? Sure, it's important to explore parallel modes as well. It helps you to understand some essential concepts like the fact that a Mixolydian scale is just a major scale with a flat 7. But if you're someone who's first learning about scales and modes, and you're wondering which one to do first, learn relative modes in the key of G. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to check out the Patreon, link in the description. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment. And I hope you like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, and secrets from Level Up Guitar.